A mortgage is really about to get cheaper because if you're coming to the end of a fixed rate deal or you've been waiting it out on a tracker, you're probably wondering what to do. Remortgage now or wait for rates to fall further. It's no easy decision. And with the average new mortgage sitting at £225,000, overpaying by just 0.5% could cost you over £1,000 every single year. To help you make a decision, today we're sitting down with specialist mortgage broker Kelly Rule, who's been supporting property investors for over 15 years. We'll break down whether remortgaging now makes sense, the biggest mistakes people make when rates start falling, and the one thing you must check before committing to a new deal. So Kelly, back in December, the Bank of England cut the base rate again for the 6th time in a row. Obviously, that on the savings side, banks are cutting their rates, so we're all making less of a return on our cash. But how does that feed through into the kind of mortgage rates we end up paying?
Great question, and one that I get asked quite a lot by investors. The base rate, yeah, absolutely right. We've had a reduction just recently to 3.75%, which is fantastic. But those reductions have already been predicted by the Bank of England. And therefore, the fixed rates that we've been seeing have already taken that into consideration. The rates that we tend to see for mortgage purposes are mainly linked to inflation and the money markets. And when we see inflation come down is when we then see further reductions from the mortgage lenders, from your 2-year fixes and your 5-year fixes and such like. Inflation currently set at 3.2% at the time of filming this. And they're projected to fall to about 3% in the early 2026. And as that continues to happen, we'll hopefully see some more reductions on the horizon.
Yeah, I think it's something a lot of people don't quite appreciate. They think that, well, if the base rate comes down, then maybe I should have waited because I would have been able to get a cheaper deal. But that's not necessarily the case because, like you say, they've priced in what they think is going to happen. So it's really only a case of if things deviate from that prediction. But I assume that that's not the only factor driving pricing because lenders are in competition with each other as well. So how does that play into it? Like how keen they are to actually do business?
Absolutely right. So we have an array of buy-to-let lenders, probably around about 60 different lenders offering buy-to-let rates at any one time, which a lot of people are flabbergasted about because no one actually knows there's that many in the market. There's a lot of competition there because everyone gets their money from the same places. But a lot of these lenders are also backed by either investment firms, if they're challenger banks, or they have their own savings deposits as well, if they're banks within their own rights. So we often tend to see is different tiers of lenders. When we're looking at buy-to-lets, we've got your more vanilla lenders that are banks within their own rights, and they're definitely the more competitive. We have the top 5 banks that are constantly in competition with each other. And once one goes, there tends to be a bit of a domino effect. So lender 1 on day 1 may have the best 5-year fix, but then lender 2 may have the best 2-year fix the following day. So we do see a lot of competition in that side of things. What we also tend to see is criteria. So with these pools of lenders, there may be one lender who is 0.2% more expensive, but they may be a little bit more flexible when it comes to certain complexities, maybe on a limited company structure, whereas the first lender who is 0.2% cheaper doesn't have that flexibility. They may be more of a tick box lender. So that's why using a mortgage broker such as ourselves really helps in those situations, because we know when there are certain levels of complexities where the slightly higher rate might actually come into play because we can get your deal through a little bit more smoother, if that makes sense.
It's something I think, again, a lot of investors underappreciate. Everyone gets very fixated on the rate, but in reality, the rate is only part of the picture. If you're only now realising just how much of a strategic decision getting a mortgage is, then we've got just the thing for you. Our £100 million property toolkit has helped hundreds of UK investors make big decisions, secure the best deals and grow their portfolios. It's packed full of tools and checklists, and you can download it for free by clicking the link in the description. Okay, so when we're thinking about remortgaging, the thing that investors really want to know is where could mortgage rates go? Maybe talk us through what would be a typical mortgage rate for if you're taking out a new deal today?
Again, this is why it's quite important to have a mortgage professional helping you, because there's so many rates on the market now. And I think I read the other day, actually, there's more rates now than there ever has been by each individual lender. Some lenders have 40 different products, and that's a mix of low rates with higher fee options, and then higher rates with lower fee options, and everything in between. So it can be an absolute minefield. But in answer to your question, if you were coming to me today and saying, I want the best overall cost of borrowing, then I would be looking at, for a limited company buy-to-let on a 5-year fixed, early 5%. I think the best one at the moment is something like 5.05%. That particular deal comes with no arrangement fee. And what we tend to find at 75% loan to value is that particular 5-year fixed product tends to work out the best on the total overall cost of borrowing because there was no fee paid. In comparison then to some of your fee products, if I was in looking at something alongside that had a 3% fee, you could get a much lower rate at about 4.3% currently, and that comes with a 3% fee. So yes, your monthly payments are going to be lower, which is great for those investors who perhaps are a little bit more cash flow conscious. You're adding your fee to the loan, so it will accrue interest over the course of the 5 years, but your monthly payments will be lower. But typically, you can be paying about £1,000 more over the 5 years in comparison because that rate is higher. So to all of my clients, I always like to discuss all of the options with you, but you can't just look at the rates. And it's the same with the 2-year fixers as well, and even the variable rate trackers with all of these fee options. I'd like to think as rates are starting to drop that potentially these higher arrangement fee products will become a thing of the past, because before 2021, your typical arrangement fee for a buy-to-let loan, 1.5%, 2%. There was very rarely any product available higher than that. Whereas now I regularly talk about a 3% product, but that's mainly because, again, we're just trying to get something a bit better cash flow out. As those rates continue to come down, I'd like to see those no-fee products will be a new norm. And as they become a little bit more lower on the rate side, maybe they'll cash flow a bit better as well, and they'll become the ultimate choice for investors.
Yeah, really good point about the fees. So if we'd like take fees out of the equation, so on a zero fee product, you said that the lowest you can get at the moment is around about the 5% mark. So we would like to hope that would come down. What do you think is realistic to hope for in terms of where it could end up?
It's all linked to inflation, and if we get to the 2% target, which is what the economists are saying that we're potentially going to get to in 2026, 2027, I can't see any reason as to why we're not going to be seeing fixed rates in 4.5%, maybe even slightly lower. I don't think personally we're going to be going back to what things were like before all of this happened. But who knows? If only I had a crystal ball and I could actually give you some actual insight as to what's going to happen.
Let's say you've got somebody who locked into one of those ultra cheap deals in the before times, before all this happened. It does feel like another world now. And they're just coming off that now. I think we've semi-answered this question, but prepare them. What do you think they could realistically be coming into? And if anything, is there anything they should be doing to prepare for what's inevitably going to be quite a jump?
Start doing your homework, I would say, around about 4 months prior to your expiry. So for those portfolio landlords out there that've got multiple properties, it's really important that you're keeping on top of those expiries to make sure you're getting everything in line before that expiry happens. When your fixed rate deal expires, you will go on to the lender's standard variable rate. It means you won't be tied in, so you won't have any penalties, which is a nice plus point to have. However, lenders' standard variable rates are eye-wateringly expensive, anything from 8% to 10% in certain instances. So we really want to avoid anyone going onto that standard variable rate unless we're doing something creative because you're planning to sell the property or something like that. We want to make sure we've got a new deal lined up for you simultaneously, so you flip onto the new deal on that day of expiry to save you any further interest. So start speaking to your mortgage professionals about month 4. What a good mortgage professional should be doing is talking to you about your options, about possibly sticking with your current lender and carrying out a product transfer. This is when you just look at the array of products that your existing lender has and literally switching over onto a new product. Most lenders these days don't tend to do any further underwriting in that scenario. More lenders are starting to do desktop valuations, which is quite new. That never used to happen, but I'm starting to see more lenders just doing a quick desktop valuation just to make sure the value is in line with what they're expecting. So just be mindful of that. If there has been a bit of a slowdown in house prices since your last mortgage, you could be stung with that, especially if you added a fee to the loan on your previous deal. That might have taken you above 75% loan to value, which means you're now in the 80% bracket, so your rate could be impacted even more so at that point. But that should be option one that your mortgage advisor is talking to you about. Option two, what else is there available out there? There are other lenders that could have come to the parapet with something a lot more attractive that actually could, in the running, could be something you could consider, especially if you're looking to release equity at that same time. There are a lot of buy-to-let lenders that won't consider additional borrowing if you're just doing a product transfer. So if you're looking to release equity, then refinancing elsewhere is also a really good idea. But just be mindful that you're going to have further fees for refinancing. So you will have legal fees in most limited company scenarios. There's not many lenders that will offer you free legals. I think there's only one or two. If you're in property and personal names, a lot more free legal options available. So your options for refinancing are better.
Yeah, there's a lot to be thinking about. It sounds like your broker should be presenting you with, I suppose, the all-in cost of these different options, right? So you've got the product transfer option, you've got different lenders, and you've got different combinations of fees and interest rates. And we get a lot of people asking as well, how should I decide? And I'm hoping that a mortgage broker should do that hard work for you and kind of run all the calculations and figure out, well, from all these hundreds of different products out there, when you put it all together, here's what comes out best for you.
Absolutely. No, and they should be by all means doing that. I mean, some of these lenders, you can approach them to do the product transfer yourself. There are some lenders that are only broker facing and wouldn't allow you to do that. But there is a saving for using a broker because they have got the whole of the market experience, will know exactly what these lenders can and can't do. And typically with a product transfer, because it's such a light touch for us as a broker, I mean, I can't talk about other mortgage brokerages, but we don't charge for a product transfer. So we can take that on for you completely fee-free. Because it typically is just one application form. So we're quite happy to do that on your behalf if that makes it a little bit of a less of a worry.
I love myself a good product transfer. You don't have to do anything. It's so good that I'm happy to pay a slightly higher rate if it means I don't have to fill in all those forms and go through it. So that's a situation that a lot of investors are going to be in. Another situation that we see is people who've maybe already come off those ultra low interest rates and they've been hanging out on a tracker of some kind because they believe that after rates spiked, rates are going to come down, which of course they have to an extent. I suppose the question for people in that position will be like, when is it good enough? When is it time to stop timing the market, assuming that they want to ultimately have the stability of a fixed rate? When's the time to say, all right, it's like we're past the worst now, let's lock in?
God, that's such a good question. And again, if only I had that crystal ball. If it was me personally, and I was on a variable rate at this point, I would carry on going a little bit longer. But again, that's me kind of just taking a little bit of a risk, knowing that there's potentially going to be a further base rate cut, hopefully, Q1, Q2 of 2026, maybe even another one towards the end of the year, economists are saying. They're trying to drive inflation down to 2%, which is why they're making this so gradual. I think there's a couple more reductions to be had here. So if you can hold out just that little bit longer, I think you've got some good savings to be had to then switch onto that fixed rate, maybe towards the end of the year. But again, security is really important for people. Probably the last 5 years, I can count on one hand how many variable rate tracker deals I've written. Not to say we're not talking about them, we're talking about them quite a lot, but most investors want to know they're locked in, they're secure, there is no risk of their payments quadrupling overnight, which could happen. Something could happen in government tomorrow, like what it did in 21-22, from -1% to 5% in 8 months. That's massive, and that could cripple a lot of people. So I can completely understand why some people would want that security sooner rather than later. And if that's you, then maybe now's the time, because rates are actually the best that they have been for a very long time. If you can go that little bit longer, maybe do it. You might be able to be in for a further reduction.
Just something we see as well is that the vast majority of investors want to be on a fix of some kind. I know that I do. So assuming that's the case, the next decision to be made is, well, how long do you fix for? How do you approach the conversation about deciding whether you should be going for like a 2, 3 or 5 year fix?
I get asked this question, I think, every hour of every day. I should just have a recording of myself answering this. There's no right or wrong answer. And that's the difficulty. I think it just all depends on your own personal circumstances, what your strategy is, and also a bit of a gut feel. 2-year fixes and 5-year fixes are the most popular that we discuss. And I always say, if you are a busy individual, you've got a hectic day job, and actually you're investing, you want to be completely hands off, which most people do, then 5-year fixes are perfect for that strategy, because you can just finance it now. You're in this for long-term capital growth. You don't have to worry about that for another 5 years. There's no hassle or expense of refinancing any sooner. So that's why 5-year fixes, I think, tend to be just a little bit more popular for that very reason. But then you've got the other half of the coin who are saying, well, actually, rates are coming down. We've proven that. There's further reductions to be had. That's exactly what everyone's saying in the press. So I think I'm just going to risk it, go on the 2-year fixed, or maybe a 3, test the market again. At that point, hopefully I can get a slightly better rate, because actually for me, I'm a little bit more cash flow conscious and I'd like to have a better rate. And I'm happy to go through that hassle and that expense of doing that. And maybe even testing the market to see if I can get a bit more of a positive valuation to release some equity. But that does come with a risk. Because like I said, a lot of lenders nowadays, even for product transfers on limited company buy-to-lets, are still carrying out a valuation, albeit a desktop valuation. But if it's a new build, for example, there might not be enough new build sales comparables from a desktop analysis to prove a valuation. And at that instance, if the value is not coming up, again, you borrowed 75% on day one, added a fee to the loan, you're then going into an 80% category, sometimes higher than that. You then have a risk of having a shortfall and maybe actually putting some money in. But on the flip side, if your valuation comes in positive and the value is proven to grow in that time, then you've got some equity that you can take out if you so wish. So all I'm trying to say is that there is a risk there for a shorter term fix. And again, it depends on whether you want to take that risk or not.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Something else that pushes people towards 5-year fixes sometimes is the rental stress tests. Maybe you could explain a little bit more how those stress tests apply and why there's a difference between 5-year fixes and anything else.
So rental stress tests are something that the lender does behind the scenes. And because this is the main affordability calculation for buy-to-lets, your income is secondary. The rental that the property generates is where the main affordability calculation comes from. So for 5-year fixes, they take the rent, they take the rate that the product is offering, plus any fee that you're adding to the loan. And then they want that to meet typically 125% of the mortgage payments for limited companies and basic rate taxpayers, or if you're a high rate taxpayer and investing in your personal name, then it's usually raised around about 140% cover or 145. So we'll do all of these calculations for you. You do not need to worry about that. But typically with a 5-year fixed rate, it is done at that pay rate you're paying. On a 2-year fixed, they take the pay rate you're going to pay, but then they typically add on an extra X% to make sure that your rent will still cover those mortgage payments at 125 or 140, 145 if there was a rate increase during the next 5 years, even though you're taking a 2-year fix. And the reason for that is because on a 5-year fixed rate, they know your rate isn't going to increase in 5 years because you're going to be fixed. On a 2-year fixed, you come off that 2-year fixed and rates could have gone through the roof. So they want to make sure that they've done that stress test. Now, stress tests used to be an absolute blanket on a 2-year fixed at 5.5%. So even if your rate was 3%, we would behind the scenes be checking what the stress test would be at 5.5%. And we would have to make sure your loan amount would meet that at that level. And if it doesn't, we'd have to reduce your loan amount down. You'd have to put more of a deposit in when you're purchasing a property. When the rates went through the roof, what lenders tended to do, or most lenders were just adopting a default plus 2%. So if you were paying 3, it would have then gone to 5. But typically there'd have been a floor of 5.5 or something like that. But what we're now seeing, now that rates are starting to come down again, is that stress tests are starting to creep back to that 5.5. Because even with a 2% increase, they're kind of around that level anyways. What we tend to do on a 2-year fixed, again, if max borrowing is important, and if we can't quite get there on the cheapest no fee rate, then we will then bring in a lower rate, higher fee option to get you to your max borrowing, which is typically about 75%. You pay a little bit more by comparison, but for some people, that 75% borrowing is actually more important than putting the extra cash in and paying less. So again, a mortgage broker should be talking to you about all of those different options and working out what it is that you need.
If you had your dream client come to you, someone who's working with you for the first time, they've got a refinance potentially coming up in 4 to 6 months, what would they have done before they speak to you? So it makes your job super easy and you're able to get them the right product for them.
I would say perhaps just do a little bit of homework yourself about how much you think the property is worth now. Have a look at properties on Rightmove. You can go on to the house price section of Rightmove as an example, or Zoopla, and you can see what has sold in your local area over the past 6 months and getting a good idea as to what sort of value you're in currently. That really, really helps, because then we can actually have more of a factual conversation. Obviously, you're going to know what your rent is because you're already renting the property. But if you've got a good idea on that value, then we can start talking facts and we can say, look, actually, that value isn't enough to get us to where we need to be. Maybe let's test a valuation. Maybe we'll go to a lender that's offering a free valuation. So it doesn't actually cost you anything to test it, to see if we're going to get there, if the comparables are a little bit close to the mark. And obviously, you're going to know your area perhaps a lot better than what I am if it's an area that I'm not overly familiar with. So that would be the best amount of homework that I would like to see. Also, having all of your documentation in one place. If you own an array of properties, having a spreadsheet so you've got all of the details in one place, which helps me massively, so I can see all of the property details, what the rental is, mortgage payments, etc. It also helps you then manage your expiries. Like I said before, it's really important for you to onboard a broker ideally about 4 months before an expiry. So if you've got a spreadsheet that's perhaps linking into your calendar to prompt you to do that, then everything's all in one place, ready to go. Even though I mentioned before about affordability being based on the rent that the property generates, your income being secondary, a lot of our lenders, even though they don't have a minimum income, they do just need to make sure you have some form of income. So whether you're employed, they like to see last 3 months' pay slips just to make sure you've got something to cover your day-to-day living expenses. Or if you're self-employed and you're taking a dividend, then they want to see ideally last 2 years self-assessment tax returns, whether that's an expat or someone living here in the UK. So if you don't have that for any reason, then I would say reach out to a mortgage broker now, because that bit can be quite important, and we can then discuss what options we have given your own personal circumstances. But I would say that's probably the best level of homework that you can do in between, and then your mortgage broker can do the rest.
Well, that's some homework to do, but it's important to be prepared, because getting the right mortgage is one of the most important first steps of any property investment. But good financing can only get you so far. You'll also need a strategy in place to find and secure competitive deals. And if you don't know how to do that, we can help. At Property Hub, our team spends all day finding discounted, high-quality UK property developments and negotiating terms that individual investors simply can't get on their own. If you want access to these opportunities, then click the link down in the description below to learn more about Property Hub Invest and see the kinds of deals that are available right now. So hopefully after this video, you know what you need to do, and you've seen how one rushed remortgage can set you back thousands and grind any plans to grow your portfolio to a halt. The good news is that by getting specialist advice and setting up your finances correctly, you'll find it so much easier to pounce on opportunities as soon as they appear. But before you start contacting brokers and comparing mortgage deals, there's something else to keep in mind, and that is where you'll buy. Get the location right, and you can turn even a relatively small budget into a winning investment. Get it wrong, and your interest rate will be the least of your worries. So check out this video next, where we break down what £50,000 can buy you in different parts of the UK.